Jason, how you doing?
I'm excellent. Yeah, it's amazing. I've been looking forward to this for a while, so thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you. So Jason, you've been sharing posts in our health and wellbeing group, sort of around properties and all the stuff that a lot of people don't really consider. And I guess landlords see this as a bit of an inconvenience, in terms of the well-being of their tenants, in terms of how they're looking after the property or how the property is being looked after. So just for our audience, if they've not come across you a little bit about before, could you just give us a brief introduction as to who you are and what you do? And
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. So I'm Jason Ratcliffe. I started my career, oh God, over a decade ago with various different lettings and sale agents throughout the Southwest and kind of pinged about different teams and learned a lot along the way. But one of the big things I learned was I suppose the formality was just wrong regarding letting agents and how things were managed with tenants and landlords. And a lot of issues arise through lack of knowledge. Then I progressed on to becoming a Royal Institute of Chartered surveyor, and went through various different roles, and then ended up, long story short, going into a lot of houses. And there was just a reoccurring theme of, well, where, certain elements or damp, mold, for example, and then there was always these certain symptoms that kept cropping up through the same scenarios of environment. But then there's always the same, where medical professionals weren't sort of au fait with home environment. So they would just be focusing on the symptoms, not the cause. So they would say, oh, you have asthma, for example, here's an inhaler. And then nothing would actually be done about it. And then it's all the way through to multiple kind of bronchitis, infection rates going up, circadian rhythms being totally out of sync. And it was just nothing in the built environment was really being done about this. Yes, we've got kind of multiple pockets of people saying, oh, yeah, we probably should do something. And then we've obviously got the medical sector going, well, we've got these medications over here to solve it. But no one's really talking about the two. So that's where the well-being surveyor really came in. So that's my kind of the second, I suppose, company that I own, and that's very much around spreading the word about the importance of our internal environments, whether it's home, whether it's work, school, and the people that reside within them and how that impacts them. So I'm just finishing off my PhD at the University of Plymouth as well on basically this thermal optimization of buildings, how we're going to change building regs. But yeah, my passion and my advocacy is very much around saying, look, homes and buildings need to be looked after, and people need to be aware of what they're doing in them to make them actually feel the best they can, re-energize, make sure that they're good for their day. But it's not just that as well, Chris. It's things like, there are amazing landlords out there, and there's really ethical landlords out there, but they're getting roped in too easily with the cowboy landlords. So these are the types of landlords that I'm proud to work with, and they love working with me because, I go into their properties, I'll do a full breakdown, kind of health first building survey. So we'll be looking at thermographic, air quality, all of these types of things, and doing a complete report for that, which then basically can say, look, if anything does happen in that property with the tenants, in situ, whose fault is that?
yeah,
Because a lot of the time with these types of landlords, it's the tenant's occupant behavior where actually we need to delve into a little bit. And hopefully I can get in before, lawsuits happen and landlords get roped into being bad landlords. So that's kind of a snapshot of what I do, really.
yeah, and that's really interesting about the element of fault, because from my experience, working in agency, it was almost like you had a checklist to ask the tenant in terms of to establish fault. So it was like, are you
Yes.
drying clothes in your home? Are you keeping it well ventilated? Now, 9 times out of 10, regardless of the answer of those questions, it would still come down to condensation being caused by the tenant, and it wasn't necessarily a nuanced conversation around, actually, are we looking at the property itself here? Is there certain elements? I've been in properties where I've rented a property in previously, and we said this off camera, where there was an actual leak from the gutter in that was causing the damp, but the managing agent was blaming us for condensation, despite knowing
Exactly.
my background in property and knowing that we needed to keep it as ventilated as possible. So it becomes sort of almost a vicious cycle. But I guess this is more and more important now because the renters reform bill's coming in, and
Yes,
this is going to
absolutely.
really hold hands to the flames in terms of who's actually responsible for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we've got, it's not in legislation yet, but we are expecting all tenancies, regardless of new existing by 2030, to be upping the band of EPCs. So again, talking about, EPC ratings, things like that. It's going to get tighter. And the problem is that penalization and that kind of the fault is just too easily put onto the landlords based on scares of, because obviously there are horrific cases with tenants having to suffer with black spot mold, with water ingress, unsafe homes because of neglect from landlords. But then this blanket license or blanket kind of way of dealing with it cannot be, it just can't happen, because then what's the point in people being landlords, even if they care about their tenants,
Absolutely. So should we take it in terms of right to the start where the basics are in terms of indoor environmental health? What is indoor environmental health, and what, if you're a landlord listening to this, why should you care about it?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. So, what is indoor quality or what is indoor health? Basically, it's a holistic approach to everything that relates to an internal environment. So, that can be the paint on the walls, that could be the insulation in the walls, that could be the type of construction that it's built from. It can be the cleaning products that are used in the home, it can be the fixtures and fittings, and also down to electric magnetic fields in homes. So when you're having Wi-Fi or when you're having electrics, stuff like that, you could have noise pollution from internally. So if, for example, an extractor fan is not correct for the environment, for example, or there's a boiler right next to a baby's bedroom and that's kicking on and off and vibrating through the walls, you could have light issues and pollution. So there doesn't, there could be inaccurate levels of lighting in a home. There's an absolute plethora of stuff that all kind of has to be taken into account when looking at home health. So it's not just kind of looking at it from a one type of perspective, but from a landlord's perspective, obviously there's a certain element of what you class as mandatory care and requirements to make sure that that property is safe and habitable. So those are things like damp and maintenance and structural repairs. So making sure that the property is safe, it's not going to fall down, there's no kind of cracking structural movement, there's no water getting in anywhere, rainwater goods are well maintained, window and doors are able to open and close properly, natural lighting and artificial lighting is sufficient, and also amenities and facilities are available and safe. So I think once you've ticked those off, from a basic landlord perspective, I think as long as you get that verified, not by a letting agent, but by somebody who's certified and understands this, is the biggest part of the battle. And then it's then looking at how to, I suppose, work with tenants to then maintain their education and understanding of occupant behavior, to then be able to work together rather than this blame game of going, well, we're dry and closing doors. Well, you may have to dry closing doors if you live in an apartment or there is no way of clear, having them outside and you don't want to run a tumble dryer. But then it's going, okay, well, how can you do that and live in, I suppose, the realms of what you have around you that actually then allows you to maintain a comfortable living home. So yeah, that's kind of what I would be saying. Absolutely.
And from when I was an agent, I would have said that your apartments, flats, and your Victorian terraces are probably the most common with those kinds of issues. But I guess that's not necessarily the case, is it? You work on so
No,
many different property types and different cases. Is there sort of a common a common denominator that affects the property types?
I think modern properties are almost more dangerous than older properties in the sense that people have a misconception of the fact that they're okay, they're modern, they've got a new build warranty, fantastic. But actually, what we do find, especially with the accelerated pressure of getting them up, getting new houses because of the population demand, it's very much the polar opposite, where actually we're seeing corners being cut. We're seeing insulation not correctly put into walls. So, it's notorious in new build developments to have black spot mold appearing pretty much everywhere over a home, bathrooms and bedrooms and kitchen areas are the prime suspects. And also then all of the kind of volatile organic compounds that get into the air, like formaldehyde and benzene and all of these types of things, which basically are from the adhesion and the paints and things that are used because they're cheap and there's no regulation on them really. It's just, you go into a modern property and you do an air quality test and it's going to be medium to high. That's scary, considering people that go into these are either, classed as a vulnerable category of new family. So there could be somebody with a new baby going into this and they think, well, it's safe, it's a new build,
Mhm.
but then that baby may then form asthma and have chest infections and long-term health effects, and no one would relate it back to living in a new build. So that's a big danger when it comes to new builds. But then vice versa on the other end of the spectrum, Victorian houses, stone built, cob built cottages, where you have to allow a certain level of dampness. Stone and cob need a certain element of dampness for adhesion to make sure they don't fall down. But it's then making sure that you're aware of, okay, well, how is that going to work? Air tightness in a property like that is not a great idea because it can accumulate all sorts of issues and toxic pollutants in the air, as well as if you're in a radon area, for example. But then also kind of normal, ordinary Portland cement plasters rendering normal closed cell paints is not a good idea because that will blister paint off the wall. So it's then really understanding the property you have in your investment portfolio as a landlord and understanding how that needs to be maintained and also what the occupants need to do to keep it safe.
Yeah, I guess you're kind of when you're taking on a project, you have to specify individually for that project and what
Yeah,
that property's requirements are, as opposed to, I'm going to use this paint because it's worked on all my other properties.
exactly. But also I've seen so many people, which is it's such a hard thing to see because some people get it right almost to the end. So they'll get, for example, they'll spend £100,000 on external render, which is the right type of lime render. It's lovely and breathable. And then they'll get a normal painter and decorator in to put weather shield paint over. And then it's going, you may as well have not bothered. It's like, it's so hard. And in coastal environments, so technically it's a coastal environment is classed as anywhere 50 miles from the coastline.
Right.
So you don't even need to be exactly on the coast. But again, a common thing there is medium damp levels or moisture levels are expected due to condensation and increased absolute humidity. So the amount of vapor within the air or the air can hold. So if you had a surveyor or a damp specialist or anybody that isn't au fait with that, come in and use a moisture reader around your house, they could misinterpret that as damp or tenant occupant behavior. So if black spot mold starts forming in a property and there's what would be classed as condensation moisture everywhere, they could say, well, that's your fault, tenant. Well, actually, if you're next to the coast, for example, you're going to get that. So therefore, you need to be kicking in more natural ventilation, more mechanical ventilation into the home, and actually then have appropriate remediation work, such as working out, getting scientific about it, but working out the cubic meterage of a property, what the facilities are, for example, for example, a shower that's, 10 minutes, you're in the shower for 10 minutes, normal shower, you could be looking at anywhere between 1 to 1.5 liters of water vapor going into the air in that 10 minutes. And you think, well, that's massive considering, a lot of people, if they have an extractor fan, it may not be appropriate. But then also this common misconception of, oh, I have a window. Okay, well, you open the window and then it drops the surface temperature of all of the walls, which then meets that dew point, which basically allows that vapor to turn into condensation and it won't get out of the property. So actually opening a window can accelerate, condensation and mold. So making sure then you've got an appropriate mechanical ventilation system in your home, seal off things like bathrooms and shower rooms, and these are the types of things that people don't understand. And it's then therefore that fine balance between, well, is it the tenant's responsibility? Is it the landlord's responsibility, or is it a bit of both? And it's this understanding. And the problem is nobody, or there's not enough people that understand this holistic link between everything in a property. So you might get a plumber come around or someone who fits bathrooms, go, yeah, there's an extractor fan, there's no problem. It's clearly not being used correctly. And it's like, well, actually, the understanding is a bit more in depth, and you need a bit more of a holistic view to actually then say, well, is it correct? Is there too much trunking going outside? Is there a thermal cut or break on the outside? Is there a moisture sensor attached to the extractor fan? So you've got to really dig behind the surface. But then obviously each one of those contractors is going to cost a landlord more money, is going to then cause more pressure and stress and frustration between the landlord and tenant. And then it ends up probably in a court hearing, and then the landlord gets lumped with quite a big kind of works order that needs to be done when there's not always a reason for that. So it is this kind of needing to re-educate and think about this, I suppose, the system that's in place that we can really kind of, do better. We can do much better, but it needs to be pushed through legislation.
100%. Yeah, there's some really interesting things I picked up on there. I mean, obviously with the coastal stuff, I had no idea about that, and 50
Yeah.
miles is quite a way away from a coast. So it strikes me that you living in Cornwall was a commercial decision rather than its natural beauty. But
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's a whole, I mean, I wanted to raise kids down here.
yeah,
And also because my life is so crazy and hectic, and I have the great privilege of traveling all over the UK, and now going globally as well, doing what I'm doing, which is awesome. It's kind of my quiet spot. But there's also, there's health benefits as well. So, negatively charged ions in the air, which can help your respiratory system, help reduce stress, improve your circadian rhythm, all of this stuff. So yeah, there's pros and cons.
definitely. And yeah, I guess obviously no property is safe, and that needs to be taken into consideration,
Yeah,
particularly on
absolutely.
the new build side. What I'd say is that it sounds like, if you're a developer and you've got property still under warranty, then you really need to be considering that as well, because this doesn't sound like a simple snag where it's
Yeah,
an area of damp gets in, it could potentially affect, the entire property because damp
yeah.
spreads.
Well, as well as that, it's very much so if you're near or you're classed as a coastal location, say 50 miles from the coast, you would then still have salinity, so salt in the air. So
Yeah,
it's actually more harmful than inland. So if you get water ingress, or I don't know, say there's a leak or some kind of crack, or there's some way into that property, and then you get moisture retention, even when that's healed and completely remedied, you're still going to get salinity retainability. So you're still going to get salts that are going to keep in that insulation and those walls, etc., which has already been found to reduce thermal efficiency by over half. So if you've got a brand new build, for example, and they leave the external envelope, exposed to the elements, which I've seen so many times, and then it gets wet, and they're kind of, oh, I'll be all right, it will dry off. But then you then kind of complete it and everything. Yes, it does dry, and building regs go, yeah, you've got 150 mil of PIR insulation in there, or rock wall, whatever it may be. Yeah, that's fine. Ticked off. Okay, under all kind of theoretical bases are covered. But actually, what's really happening under the surface is you've got salt retainability in that wall. So whereas that may have hit kind of say 0.16 watts per meter squared Kelvin, which is a building regulation standard under approved document L, that may actually, because of the salts in the air, that may have significantly increase that. So it may actually be nearing kind of 0.3, 0.4, which, you know, you would be expecting a retrofit of a solid stone wall, but actually then you're getting it in a new build. And people don't take this into account.
No.
So again, this won't then be valid within a new build warranty. So if you've then got mold, for example, etc., or whatever it may be, because it's not a common known or accepted issue, which it should be, then you go to these new build warranty and say, look, I've got an issue here. This is doing this. They'll say, no, sorry, it's out of our hands. And then, you know, then they can't sell the property because, well, it's a known issue and it's just a reoccurring issue, which we now know is a health issue as well and going to increase heating costs. So it's really knowing that kind of the importance of that. I see too many of my clients under expert witness cases come to me and I have to then pick this up from
Yeah.
there. So it's kind of then going, oh, you've got a new build and you were told not to bother about a survey. You were told not to worry about all these different things because you've got protection. And then you find yourself in, you know, 10, 20, 30,000 pounds deficit. So it's so important to know that and understand it.
But let's get into some of the sort of health impacts, because in terms of sort of the environmental health or the indoor environmental health, there's a lot of factors, whether it's
Mm.
ventilation, you know, whether it's moisture, there could be sort of different variables. So from the least, you know, sort of invasive or you know, detrimental to your health, right up to the most serious cases, what are the sort of things that can happen?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones are, I mean, ventilation is always one of the biggest ones, whether that's, you know, ventilation obviously is offset by a noise pollution as well. So, for example, if you've got a bedroom that's next to a busy road or a school or whatever it may be, you want to be closing your windows, you want to be closing your trickle vents, which at the top of the windows to allow natural ventilation. You then want to be closing your curtains and shutting your door, so completely isolated, so it's dark. And the problem with that, then you have no ventilation. And when you're, say, for an 8 hour cycle, you're looking at roughly, this is a very rough figure, but you're looking at about 300 milliliters of expelling, you know, moisture vapor per person. So if you've got a couple of people in a room, you know, that's over half a litre of moisture going into the air with nowhere to go. So that's why quite often, even in new builds, you'll see bedrooms, there'll be a prime place for black spot mold. And then especially around windows, because they're the kind of areas, the cold spots. And then people will just use bleach, for example, or these harsh mold removers, which can actually then have a residue which releases into the air and can be almost as toxic as mold itself. And then the mold spreads, and then it gets worse and worse. And so that's kind of that. I suppose that's the most common issue that we often see.
And how does that affect your health? So what could that potentially do to you over a period of time?
Yeah, so it really depends on your sensitivity on an individual basis. Because some people, I would love to be one of those people, but I'm not. But some people can be in mold infested, horrible conditions and not really be bothered by it. But the majority of people are to a degree. So, you know, for people that are sensitive, which, you know, there are a lot of people out there, mold spores and the toxicity of that is pretty, yeah, it can be very harsh on health. So they normally release actively throughout the nighttime. That's kind of where the active, I suppose, spore releases. And the mycotoxins will end up getting into your system. It can get into your blood. It can get into your lungs. And then you can end up with things going from respiratory issues, again, asthma, for example,
Yeah.
lower immune system. So you'd end up just having loads of colds, coughs, flus, and just you just always feel under the weather. Plus, it can lead to things like your circadian rhythm. So, obviously, going through deeper sleep and then coming out. So, you've got a full cycle of sleep. It can really mess with your sleeping patterns. So, you're going to be tired. It increases anxiety, stress, depression, even. And also things such as, you know, mold infections. You get infections on your lungs and in your skin and in your blood as well. So, there can be like some really nasty stuff going on. So, yeah, It's a huge issue. And also there's research which is now showing if you're on the spectrum, so you're neurodivergent, they can actually intensify your symptoms and your actual, your behaviors. So if you have autism, it's been known that it'll affect and worsen and accelerate your symptoms. So yeah, it can quite literally ruin people's lives.
That's gobsmacking. I had no idea that that was so intertwined in terms of your
Yeah,
environmental health can.
yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. So, in terms of then worst case scenario, the house has been sort of gradually got worse and worse. I've spoken to a few damp surveyors in the past where they've said once it goes past a certain point, it's beyond the point of no return. Is that something that you see in certain cases?
It, I think beyond the point, I suppose a tipping balance is, or the tipping point from where remedial works and mold preventative measures are no longer viable. So, if it gets to a certain point where it's really ingrained, it likes fibrous materials. So if it's really ingrained into certain things, it is, yeah, you get to a point where you go, look, okay, white vinegar is not going to solve this. Not even a harsh chemical, really harsh mold kind of treatment. So yeah, there are times where if it's really kind of taken grip, you're just going to have to say replaster the inside. But if it's got to that point, there's normally a significant reason for that, whether there's, rising damp, penetrative dampness, whether there's some kind of water ingress, whether there has to be something that's, it can't just be due to living conditions unless you're, I don't know, you've got a laundry or your laundrette and you're continuously having things on all the radiators and you've got a massive kind of 500 litre fish tank with it. So you'd have to have pretty extreme circumstances. But normally that's when you would see it to be what you would class as a renovation. So you would go in and, I've been into properties where you don't even know what the color of the walls are anymore. It's that bad. There's all different colored molds and, there's dry rot everywhere, wet rot. It's horrendous. And even with breathing kind of safety measures, you're just going, oh my God, I can't be in it for that long. So yeah, absolutely. There is a time, and you will need at that point to take extreme measures. Absolutely.
I got to ask, have you got your own gas mask at the ready for those kinds of properties?
I do. I do. I have, gloves. I've got my own kind of, yeah, my breathing apparatus and everything else. Absolutely. But yeah, it's a difficult one. It is, and it's hard because you've got to try and stay impartial as well. When you're going into these, especially a lot, unfortunately, dare I say it, council houses and council homes and vulnerable people that have been placed into those types of environments, they have these issues. And there's a lot of kind of pockets of councils around England and the UK which, yeah, do questionable ethics, shall we say. So it's difficult to kind of stay impartial in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly around sort of the non-standard construction homes that were built in the 50s and the 60s. And then
Yes.
some of the remedial works that were done in the 70s, where they tried to, create cavities or try and remove some of the steel framing or whatever else.
Yeah.
They either just plugged it with crap or,
Yeah.
and,
I mean,
and
it hasn't changed. Problem is, it hasn't changed, and this is it. Where people in government, etc., they're putting these schemes in place, these grants, and big government approved seal of approval over everything. And then, we've seen it with expanding foam in roof voids, for example.
yeah,
There was grant systems. You couldn't have any other energy efficient improvements unless you had this. And then we found out, oh, actually, it's condemned all the houses and you can't get mortgages and the closed sell stuff. Yeah, you need a new roof, sorry. But we're not going to pay for that for you. So you've got all these people that have been left with houses like that. But also a big one, which I'm fighting continuously, is retrospective cavity infill. So a lot of people then go, yeah, let's fill the cavity with whether it's polystyrene balls, mineral
Yeah.
blown insulation. And, you know, if you've got other measures, so for example, that external facade stays dry, or you've got external rain screen cladding, then yes, it can work kind of in conjunction with other things. But the issue is the externals. So you obviously you've got two masonry skins and then a cavity, so an air gap in between. The point is that initial outer skin is not completely watertight because, you know, the render might start cracking, there might be a bit of movement, and you're never going to stop it being watertight or allow water to get in. Now, that's what the cavity's for, and then you have wall ties, which then stop it getting to the inner leaf. But then when you fill that, make it essentially a monolithic construction, so a complete one element, you're then just allowing that water to saturate, and then that's when you get sagging pockets of cold spots, accelerated water ingress,
Yeah.
and then, you know, that's when things can start going horribly wrong. But it's that kind of lack of understanding. But it's all these measures that the government kind of push through, going, yeah, we're going to do this. It's a brilliant idea because so and so has said so. But it's like, well, an energy consultant may not know building pathology, for example. So it's just this complete chaos, to be honest.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about passive homes is that a lot of them, they're not good for indoor or environmental health because they're not allowing that breathing space. With the amount of energy efficient solutions that they've got in it. I mean, that's just one take. But if you're a landlord, what can you do to sort of, I guess that there's a cost element involved by actually treating this as an investment, that the longer you look after your property and the more that you identify any potential cold spots or moisture within the property or poor ventilation, the longer that property is going to go on for without having to sort of make drastic works to it. What as a landlord can you do to sort of ensure that you're keeping the environment healthy and potentially stopping any further issues arising?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we then, for a minute, take out, so to answer that question, to take out ethics, okay? So we're just talking about an investment now. So hard money has to come, return on investment, right? So one, you're going to be looking at the areas, not just damp, but the whole property. So making sure the electrics are up to date, making sure they're encased correctly, they're safe, there's no excessive electromagnetic fields that are, you know, causing disruption in the property. Making sure that damp is kept at bay, so making sure you've got external drainage, for example, damp-proof treatments if that's required, and the right kind of maintenance to a property. You know, you've got double, triple glazing in place as and where possible, natural ventilation, also mechanical ventilation, which is really important to make sure that you're just continuously having a positive airflow through the property. And that's then managed. So mechanical airflow needs, you know, its filters changing. It needs to be maintained because otherwise it can just be pumping toxins and bacteria and stuff around the property and making it worse. So again, back to passive house, that's an issue there which people need to address. So as a landlord, then you go, okay, well, a lot of the time, let's get this for economic viability. We go, okay, well, what needs to be done? Not kind of trickling it through based on complaints and being responsive. Let's be proactive. So we need to do some maintenance work to this property before it's able to be tenanted. Right. So let's have a full inspection of the property, not just by a surveyor, but it needs to be a holistic well-being building surveyor. So it needs to have somebody who understands the building pathology, building regulations, lettings regulations, but also internal energy and internal environment. So they can piece all of this together and put a report together to say, right, all of these things are an essential, all of these things are an optional extra, they're nice to have if there's a budget for. And then
Yeah.
you then tie it all in together with the essential project work. And then after that, showcase it. So actually then say, okay, well, what have we done? Let's go through and actually check that all the work that's been done has been done correctly and up to the standard, not just building regulation standard, but the standard I want as a landlord to actually have in my investment. Because then what you're then going to do is you're going to attract better rent, dare I say it. You're going to have if you've got, there's two properties on the same road, and one is just a standard slapdash landlord, and the other one is kind of going, look, this home has been built as a home. You're probably going to end up with a better result on the amount of rent. You're going to get better selection of tenants as well. So you'll probably get better quality long-term tenants in there. So you're going to have less gaps of kind of non-paying rent. And also you're going to have a lot less maintenance and repair issues and tenant complaints. So actually then, you'll have, even if you're then doing that as a self-management and you're not going through a letting agent, you can then actually then have more peace of mind that you're not then backwards and forwards with tenant issues. So there's a whole array of things that can actually be put in place, which for a financial perspective, an investment portfolio, you could be really sitting on a bit of a gold mine if you actually look at the well-being as that type of thing and leave ethics out of it. Obviously, ethics are very important, but obviously bottom line and profitability of the landlords is so important. So yeah, that's definitely how I would do that. That's kind of why I've recently put a building performance audit together. So it's actually the first one of its kind, which I'm really proud of. And it allows with my patented tech elemental cube. So basically, I come in and I do exactly that for landlords. So we'll look at it and we can then say, okay, what needs to be done here? But then also checking afterwards to make sure it's ticking those boxes and doing so, like U values of the walls, if you're doing thermal optimization, for example, and actually have a bespoke third party report that goes, here you go, it's court compliant as well. People will understand it. And if a tenant then does raise an issue, they're not immediately then putting the landlord on the back foot. They can say, well, actually, I've done all my due diligence. This is exactly what the property is. We could come and re-inspect, but then there's a case already there to say, look, there's an ethical understanding here that the landlord's done everything they can, and actually this is a tenant issue, or the tenant hasn't raised a maintenance concern which has caused an issue, and it can then kind of have that standing. So that's I'm hoping that's going to be more of an acceptable kind of universal approach rather than just me going, it's an amazing idea, people should take it seriously.
Well, that's amazing. So you're actually giving value out to the industry to try and support them make those
Yeah,
decisions.
absolutely. Yeah.
So Jason, we're almost out of time. Where can people find you if they want to connect, if they want to find out about this guide, or if they might have a property that needs your expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a start, I'm now UK based rather than just Cornwall. So, I do a lot in Birmingham, Leeds, all over the place because, I think it's essential. But yeah, so we've got, I am a member of this amazing network as well. So if you're a member, then just contact me on these guys and through Chris. I've also got my own podcast, which is Heal Your Home podcast. And it's basically me then chatting to people throughout different industries, medical professionals, etc. That's based on different takes on home environment. So it's not just me here going, guys, I think this is a good idea. And also jason-ratcliffe.co.uk. That's my kind of well-being side of the business. So yeah, there's a whole load of ways that people can get hold of me.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll get a link out for that podcast this afternoon. That'd be fantastic.
Thanks, Chris.
So yeah, Jason, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You've certainly taught me a lot, and I hope the audience have got a lot of value out of it. We'll look forward to your posts coming in UK Homes Network, keeping us updated with some of the projects you're working on and some of the stuff that you're highlighting. So thank you very much for that. We will be back next week. We'll share more details of our webinars that are soon to be unveiled. And for all you guys, look forward to seeing you on Wednesday night at the Indian Brewery. Thank you so much for joining this session, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Take care.